All right, joining me now here on the Matthew Filipowicz Show is Omar Yamini. Omar is the author of the new book, What's Wrong with You? What you, your children, and our students need to know about my 15-year imprisonment from age 20 to 35. You can find the book at theproperperception.com. You can also follow him on Twitter at Yamini Omar. Omar, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me, Matt.
All right, so Omar, let's begin by describing your background a little bit and how exactly you ended up in prison.
My background, my road to prison is not one of the typical stories people hear. I wasn't raised in what we use as at-risk neighborhoods and at-risk families. My parents didn't drink, no drugs, no alcohol, no nightlife partying. The neighborhood we were raised in as children was a peaceful, children-friendly environment type of place. But I allowed some harmful influences into my life about my junior, senior year, excuse me, in high school. And when I speak to young people, I'm very clear with the influences you invite into your life, the company you keep. Those peer influences are just as powerful as any influences we can get from our parents and from our home environment. And so that's what happened to me, allowing those harmful people who young men who were just as lost as I was at that time, looking for something to do and needing something to do at that vulnerable age right after high school, when you haven't prepared for your future, not working, not going to school. Those streets are real. Those dangers, that time in a young person's life is as vulnerable as it may get in this day and age.
So you were arrested and actually taken to Cook County Jail. This is for actually, real quick though, what were you actually arrested for?
I was arrested for first-degree murder under the theory of accountability, and that is one of the most important points of emphasis or topics of speech when I speak to young people. That accountability. I was held accountable not for the actual crime itself, but for being with someone who committed that crime. And our young people need to understand that you don't actually have to be the person who commits the crime. If you were with someone who does, you can be charged. You can, and in most cases will be charged with the crime that person committed. And that is because you were with someone who you had no business being with. And that's serious, especially here in Chicago. So many young people get scooped up for hanging out with some guys, and in case young ladies now, and that person goes and commit a crime. You may not even know this person is intended to do this thing here. But because you arrived, you will have to prove your innocence, that you had nothing to do with that. And for poor people, young people, that can be difficult. And that's what happened to me. I didn't commit the crime, but I was with someone who did. And so I, too, was charged in that case.
And once you were arrested, you were brought to Cook County Jail. We get to one thing about your book. It actually follows your imprisonment through several different jails. You actually weren't at one jail. You were moved around quite a bit. So that let's start out by discussing your time at Cook County, because you were actually in Cook County Jail before your trial for about 3 years, correct?
Absolutely.
To me, that's a stat that really, and it's not uncommon, but I actually think that most people think that, and we're supposed to have the right to a speedy trial in America, but you were held again, held in prison for 3 years before your trial actually happened. That is wild. Let's talk about because you described the process unbelievably well. Let's describe the admission process and what happened when you were in Cook County Jail.
Well, Cook County Jail, as I described in my book, I call it an animal shelter. Mm-hmm. And the reason I call it an animal shelter is because it is lawless, especially during my years there when I went in from 1996 to 1999. And as lawless could be. Anything can and will happen at any given time. And so it was basically human survival at the core of it, because you were dealing with young men who were, as I say in my book, slaves to their impulses. Whatever crazy notion that came to mind that was violent or unruly, so many of them would obey it, would succumb to it, and just act out on what they were feeling or what they may have been thinking at the time. When I arrived there, immediately we were just ushered in through a tunnel. I described this tunnel in my book. And the treatment that you receive from those sheriffs there are just as brutal as some treatment you can get on the wings from the gangs. It could be vicious at times, very vicious.